Chapter 10 Purple River. In the ancient world, romantic tales were usually the stuff of legends only, and family units were nearly always fashioned out of expediency and familial loyalty. But in Estolia, the concept of love took on a much deeper meaning. The rich soul-to-soul connection between the two halves in a marital relationship in Estolia simply defied description. The keeping of the soul was, in truth, the greatest of the gifts from deity to the sons of Zacharias. Even in our modern world, the most extravagant tales of romantic love come nowhere near to what Estolians not only expect, but also experience. Fernando Gilmar Zakarian, Capitulo 75. When Zacharias got to his feet, he felt renewed and invigorated. At a sound behind him, he swiveled and saw Estoliana coming towards him. She was now a stunning vision of loveliness. She wore jeweled sandals and the creamy-colored sheath dress. Her hair was pulled back and fastened away from her face. She held a couple of the large bags stuffed full of items. A wide plank stuck out of one of them. "Are you ready?" he asked her. She nodded, and then followed him as he struck out towards the distant mountain peak. They were still within sight and sound of the inrushing tide when he noticed a thick line of trees and foliage off to their left. He gestured towards the greenery. "The water in the stream was not very fresh." He wrinkled his nose in a grimace. "I am hoping we can find some fresh water. That looks a promising direction." It didn't take long to reach the thick line of trees. They could hear the purling sound of water over stones as he led the way through the foliage. They both came to a sudden halt at the vision presented to them. There was a river paralleling the trees. It was purple. "I've never heard of a purple river," she said. He set his bundles down and moved to the edge of the water. Up close, the purple color was not as brilliant as from a distance. He pulled off his sandals and waded in. The water was soothing against his skin. He looked back to the bank of the river where Estoliana was watching him. "Is it okay to drink?" she asked. He bent over and scooped up some water in his hands. It looked clear, without color, like water should look. The first handful leaked out while he studied the color. He scooped up a second handful and brought it to his nose to smell it. It seemed to smell exactly as water should smell. With one more glance at Estoliana, he scooped up a third handful and took a sip. It tasted like water should. He grinned at her and scooped up another handful. "It's delicious," he told her. He felt something break under his foot and glanced down curiously. A dark burst of color in the water near his foot alarmed him. When he moved his foot, he saw there was still a rapidly spreading plume of purple rising from where he crushed something. It wasn't blood, as he thought to begin with. When the water cleared, he saw a half-crushed snail. "I think the purple comes from the snails that appear to be quite common here." There were dozens, perhaps hundreds in the water. Estoliana sat on a large rock and began unlacing her sandals. He moved closer to the edge of the river, ready to assist her if she needed it. He crushed several other snails underfoot and left behind a trail of thick purple color. He was almost to the shore when he heard a deep voice proclaim behind him, "Willow wall." He pivoted rapidly, his hand slapping his hip, regretting the loss of his sword now more than ever. He crouched slightly, ready to defend Estoliana with his bare hands if needed, and scanned the vicinity looking for the new threat. Nothing. Large, clumsy birds were standing on the far side of the river, and a few were floating on the surface of the water, looking at him curiously. He shifted his stance, preparing to look around more carefully for whoever called out to him. "Willow wall. Willow wall." He swiveled back around, knowing the sound was extremely close. It was only then that he realized what was happening. He looked at Estoliana. She was holding her sides and laughing. "It is the birds themselves who speak," He was embarrassed. When her laughter spent itself, he said to her, "The water is most refreshing." She stepped carefully into the stream and drank for some time. When she finished, she picked up a snail, looking at it curiously. She crushed it in her hand and they both stared at the purple pigment. When she dipped her hands in the water, she had to rub them together vigorously to get the purple color to wash off. On the far side of the river were scores of birds. They were ugly things, he thought. Big, bulky bodies, clumsy when taking off or landing. Brown, grey and white feathers. The only redeeming feature was their brightly coloured beaks, some yellow, some purple. Despite the ugliness of most of their plumage, they had tufts of green, purple and yellow accent feathers on their faces that were as bright as the rest of their plumage was dull. The accent feathers gave them a comical appearance, especially when they made their peculiar sound in a deep, masculine, human-like voice. The beach on the far side of the river was the first sand beach he had seen on the island, and it was teeming with the willow walls. There were a few large caves in the side of a massive butte which bordered the purple river as far as he could see. He considered trying to cross the water to make use of the caves, but the buzzard-sized birds seemed to be quite numerous, living in the caves, and there was no clear vegetation on that side of the river. Just sand, caves, and birds. Once they were both fully refreshed, they continued their walk upstream. For a while, the plateau on the other side paralleled the course of the river. Then it started to angle towards the water. Ahead of them, it looked like the land jutted out at a right angle to the water, cutting it off. It was only as they neared the impressive plateau with, at the end, the stump of an old mountain, that it became apparent the river flowed through a tunnel. They could see the glint of sunlight off the water in the depths of the tunnel. The spit of land in front of them must not be very wide. A second stream of water trickled down along the edge of the plateau, and they turned to the right to follow it towards the crumbling remnants of the old mountain. The distance was not great, and they discovered the stream they were following bubbled up from the ground. Estoliana went up to the edge of the pool of water and knelt on the moss ringing it. She dipped her hands in the water and raised it to her mouth, sipping at first and then drinking deeply. When she was done, she brushed the excess water from her mouth and said, "I've heard of springs like this, where the water itself is a gift from deity." "It is clear, Estoliana. Deity is with us, guiding us." He didn't know how to share with her what he learned earlier. He knew what he wanted to do, but she needed to choose to be part of the future deity promised him. He could not expect to receive the blessings he was promised if he did anything against the will of this woman. His eyes met hers, and for several heartbeats they were looking at one another. Finally, he broke the connection and looked around. The features of the location seemed to be ideal for a settlement. He set his burdens on the ground and walked up to the pond at the base of the rocky outcrop. The water, when he tasted it, was even more pleasant than the purple river water. Estoliana set her bags at her feet and also looked around. She was looking to the south, back the way they came. Scattered around them was a field of rough stones. Zacharias imagined a once grand mountain, shaking off the rocky facade of its youth before relaxing to enjoy the weathering of old age as nothing more than a pillar of rock. Beyond the tumbled stones was a grassy plain, the sort which might take to the production of crops of grains and other foods. The trees he recognized along the watercourse were olive and almond trees. He remembered the last place that the Ankamoon took on cargo, the island of Izquierdo. He helped bring the cargo on board, lashing it to the top of other crates, bundles of sticks that the first mate said could be planted and would produce a wide variety of fruit trees. He would have to see if he could locate the bundles and plant them properly. "This looks safe and well placed for us," he told Estoliana. "I believe we should stop here."